Name me a single objective we've ever set out to accomplish that we failed on.
Do you regret not sounding the sirens?
I do not.
What audacity to think that I should be allowed to live somewhere.
What has Joe Biden and the Democrats in the administration failed on? I can't think of anything. California is totally crumbling. The Nancy Pelosi Federal Building put out an interesting announcement to their employees. Los Angeles has to pay $11 million to a hotel that homeless people destroyed, and Housing First doesn't work. Also, the Maui guy who didn't sound the alarms resigned. We'll get to all of that on this jam-packed Friday. Coming up on this episode of Daily Caller Live, my name is Jobob. Daily Caller Live starts right now.
One.
Here we go!
Might be the only brown guy on earth named Jobob.
That is actually their name, Jobob.
Live from the dingy bunker that's completely cut off from the outside world, except for you fine folks. My name is Jobob. This is Daily Caller Live. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today it is Friday, August 18th, year of our Lord 2023. Hope you're having a good day, because I'm about to ruin it. I'm not really, but some interesting stuff going on around the nation. But I want to focus specifically on California, because there's a lot of things that are going on in California that all of you around the country should know about, especially because Gavin Newsom is running for president, the governor of California. I don't know what his platform will be. Are gas prices too low in your state? Do you not have enough homeless people wandering the streets? Do you get to go outside without being murdered? Then we can change all that. We will implement California policy where you will have to worry about all of those things. But before we get specifically to California, I wanted to play this clip from a Joe Biden speech, not yesterday, but 2 days ago. Yesterday, slept in a little bit. Sorry about that. Weren't here, but that's the explanation. Anyways, Joe Biden said this, and I feel like it's kind of emblematic of what the American people's role as a citizenry is. Watch this, and we're not really going to even have to discuss it. It is what it is.
Name me a single objective we've ever set out to accomplish that we failed on. Name me one in all of our history. Not one.
Yeah. So that's that. Joe Biden says, name me a single objective that we failed on. How much time do you have? Can we get through this entire list in a day? In a week? We can go on about a list of examples of things that the president and his administration has not succeeded on. But I feel like there's one big one that's like, do you then call the Afghanistan exit a success? You can talk about the border, you can talk about high prices, you can talk about inflation, you can talk about public safety, you can talk about all of these things. But just in terms of a one thing that is objectively, according to everybody, an abject failure, Afghanistan. So you want one thing, Mr. President? There's one thing, which is picked from a list of a bunch of different things that the administration has not succeeded on. But speaking of people from his party, I thought this was hilarious, and we'll start to dive into our California-ness going on. Already people in the comment section saying, California is an S-hole, says Caesar. I won't bring that on the screen, but I can bring this one on screen. Rhonda says, California is down the tubes. That's a nice way of putting it. California and New York, Becky says. But California is, I think, a good look into how progressive policies enacted play out. I live in California, so I'm much closer to a lot of this stuff than I think a lot of people are. But considering the fact that, again, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, is running for president of the United States. I've been saying this for a year now. He's not announced. I know that. People are like, no, he's not running. He is running. He has to run. Just logistically, he has to run. Gavin Newsom is running for president. And because he's running for president, I think there should be a shining spotlight, even more so than there already is, on the state that he has governed into the ground, more or less. And it's not just his fault. The supermajority in both houses of, in both chambers of California legislation, both being, again, Democrat supermajorities, is also the problem. But this is ironic. It's hilarious. It's sad. It's horrible for the country and the people. But this is a news story that's flashed across the headlines the last couple of days. Employees at the San Francisco Federal Building have been told they need to work from home for the foreseeable future. And Nancy Pelosi's picture is on the screen because her name is on the building. The federal building is telling Nancy Pelosi and other workers to work from home because coming into the San Francisco federal office is too dangerous. This particular individual who's tweeting this said he walked outside of the San Francisco Federal Building. Is it not named the Nancy Pelosi Federal Building? I thought it was. Anyways, the San Francisco Federal Building that Nancy Pelosi also often works out of, at the very least, is closed to employees because of how dangerous it is. This guy took a walk outside of the building. He said he saw 49 people smoking and injecting fentanyl outside of the building. I recorded all of this on my iPhone, and I will play that video for you now. Just watch this. This is what's outside of the San Francisco Federal Building that workers are not allowed to come into anymore because it's not safe. Actually, watch this and tell me if you would go into this building. Yeah, it continues on like this for a little bit.
It was quite today.
Oh, shit.
It's going to be a hard no from me on that one. And yes, it actually is called the Pelosi Federal Building. This is from SF Gate. Well, just to begin, the big headline. Workers in San Francisco's Nancy Pelosi Federal Building told to stay home due to crime. The downtown area is not safe. The conditions of the downtown area, which houses the U.S. Federal Building, is no longer safe for employees to come to work. It includes the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Transportation, and many other federal government jobs. Bottom line is they received a memo from the Assistant Secretary of the building saying, hey, you better not come in to work anymore because you might get stabbed on your way into the office. Again, not funny, not something to make light of, but holy cow. The irony, the I told you so, just fascinating. But it doesn't end there in California. That is the San Francisco Federal Building, the Nancy Pelosi Federal Building that workers are not allowed to come into because it's too dangerous. But on the other side of the state, not east to west, but north to south, in Los Angeles, California, another story arises. Do you remember Project Room Key by any chance? It was a federal project, specifically in California, funded by FEMA, to quote-unquote house homeless people in hotels. Now, I'm going to play you a clip from July of 2022 when they were talking about the Project Room Key ending in the city of Los Angeles. Now, regardless of what you think about homeless people, I'm going to attempt to make the case throughout the next two different things we're going to talk about that housing first doesn't work. It seems pretty obvious and pretty evident. But in total and in all, the housing first idea that people need housing and then they can get back on their feet, I think is bunk. And I'm hoping more people are starting to realize this. Watch this news clip again from July of 2022 before Project Room Key ended, and then we'll get to the update on this particular story, which I thought was fascinating. Watch this.
It's nearly noon, and Daniel Dickerson has yet to figure out where he's going to sleep tonight. He's just abandoned his tent after a local gang showed up this morning with guns.
What audacity to think that I should be allowed to live somewhere. Yeah, I guess I should just go die somewhere, because that's what they want.
Until this week, he's had a room at the Mayfair Hotel thanks to Project Room Key, a federal pandemic program that paid for hotel rooms to get the homeless off the street. FEMA is ending the program this fall.
I said, oh, okay, so I'm just going to go back to the sidewalk and don't let the door hit me in the ass on the way out? And she goes, yeah.
On July 1st, there were 215 people sheltered at the Mayfair. By Friday, there were only 2.
So Project Room Key was a whole thing of like, we're going to let bums and junkies into hotels and give them free rent. Now, this is aside from, well, okay, here's what the argument needs to be based in. First of all, like that guy said, which is just so telling of the entitlement by a lot of the people that are on the streets. One, it is easy to feel sympathy for them. I feel sympathy for them. But at the same time, nobody deserves anything. Anywhere at any point. You never deserve anything just to be handed to you. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not life, liberty, and happiness, which in your case, happiness might be a hotel room. That's not what it says. You have the ability to pursue happiness in this country. So that guy, I just didn't like his tone. It threw me off track here. People, who had the audacity that I should be able to deserve to live somewhere? No, dude, you don't deserve anything. But the bottom line is they had 200-something people staying in this hotel over the course of the pandemic, and then the program ended, and all of those people needed to go find somewhere else to live. Without getting into the arguments about if you can't afford to live somewhere, go live somewhere else, this headline has popped up in the last couple days. An LA hotel became homeless housing. The city now is paying $11.5 million to cover the damage. Kevin Kiley, who is an assemblyman, he's a congressman now from California, tweeted this, and I thought this was interesting, and it kind of encompasses this whole homeless craze in California. He says this: California has spent $20 billion on homelessness, only to see the situation get much worse. One Gavin Newsom initiative, Project Room Key, aimed to magically solve the problem by putting homeless in hotels. This didn't lead to permanent housing, but it did wreak havoc on the hotels and the surrounding areas. The Mayfield in LA suffered $11.5 million in damage paid for by the taxpayer on top of the cost of the program. Among the damages, broken windows, broken televisions, broken granite top counters, spray painted hotel shower rooms, smeared feces around the doorways. The LA Times described the items like vases being hurled from the windows and scenes of open-air drug use, discarded hypodermic needles, antisocial behavior, and criminal activity. At the end of the day, the program did not work to actually make anybody's lives better. They just had a temporary, quote-unquote, solution that I would argue is not a solution, that resulted in tons of damage to property and then ultimately the taxpayer. And the question is that worth it? There's been several studies, but this whole idea that housing is the number one thing that people need. Well, first things first, that is operating under the assumption that the government can get housing at a reasonable and affordable price to the taxpayer. I think there's some stat that says it's like $600,000 to $700,000 to house one person in a quote unquote permanent housing situation. And that is not saying that they're going to be drug tested. That is not saying that they need to look for a job. It is just giving somebody something that the majority of Americans have to work very, very hard for. Kevin Kiley also, again, at the very beginning, pointed out that California has spent $20 billion to, quote unquote, fight homelessness. And now, if there were a situation in which you could say that, oh, this is benefiting, it would be that homelessness has gone down, right? $20 billion, right? Homelessness has to have gone down in the state, right? No. Homelessness has doubled in almost the last 10 years. California obviously is the most populous state in the union, so it's expected to have more just on a per capita basis. But as the most homeless people in the entire country, almost a third of homeless people are in California. If you can't afford to live somewhere, move somewhere else. And the idea that housing alone is going to fix all of these problems is hilarious when you see what housing alone gets people. You get poop smeared on the doorways, you get vandalized rooms, and you get people who don't respect the place that they're given. The argument in the debate between housing first and help first, I feel like should be settled at this point. The problem is, and this can go into a bigger, longer thing that'll lead us into our next thing we're talking about, California housing. The problem is that the homeless industrial complex, much like the lefties' complaints on the military industrial complex, the homeless industrial complex is a thing. People make a ton of money. That $20 billion that got spent in California didn't just evaporate into thin air. No. Domestic NGOs, nonprofits, a bunch of people got that money. There's a clip, dang, I should have pulled the clip up. There's a clip of somebody on the street asking, what do you do for a living? And the lady says, I am a nonprofit housing administrator or something in Los Angeles. This lady makes $242,000 a year to, quote unquote, advocate for more housing. And so I think what I'm ultimately saying is housing first is proven to not have worked, but we can't stop it because so many people are on the slush fund of getting rich off of the taxpayer dollars getting spent to build housing. It does not cost $600,000 to $700,000 to house one individual. And yet we continue to pay it constantly in the state of California because there's so many people involved and so many people getting rich. One of the other problems in California, like I said, housing first doesn't work, but there is a new approach by the Los Angeles mayor. Karen Bass is instituting a new program in which she is making an attempt to allow people to, well, let me just read this. This is from the Los Angeles Times. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass scores a U.S. policy shift to expedite homeless housing. Again, this is operating on the assumption that housing first works, which it does not, and that it is a well-oiled, streamlined system that doesn't waste taxpayer money, yours and my money, at all. Mayor Karen Bass has gotten a big ask from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which has agreed to allow L.A. to put homeless people into housing before they compile all of the documentation necessary to prove their eligibility. In other words, L.A. is going to be on the forefront of a new policy that says people are allowed to go into the housing, the permanent, quote-unquote, homeless housing, before they can prove that they're eligible for the housing. Now, the argument for this is that, well, there's such a backlog of people and so many units are sitting empty because the paperwork is so extensive and you have to do this and that and there's bureaucracy. But rather than fix the bureaucracy, rather than fix the problem, they're going to say, okay, no, you can just come in here and hopefully your paperwork goes through. Here's the biggest problem I have with that. Once something is instituted by any government entity, it does not go away. Ever, ever, ever. Was it Milton Friedman? I forget who says it. It's Keynes. Keynesian is the communist and Milton Friedman is the free market guy, I think. I always get those reversed. But one of those guys said that there is nothing more permanent than a temporary government project solution initiative. There's a program. There we go. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program, and that seems to be exactly what's going to happen here. The thing is that your socialist light Democrats that run various parts of the country know that. Barack Obama knew that. Barack Obama knew that if he could get the quote-unquote Affordable Care Act, which is almost as bad as the Inflation Reduction Act, as in the Affordable Care Act made healthcare more expensive for everybody, he knew that if he could get that through, nobody would be able to take it out. Remember, Donald Trump in 2020 and in 2016 ran on not get rid of the Affordable Care Act. He ran on repeal and replace. Two things, repeal and replace. I, for one, do not care about replacing. I care about repealing. Just get rid of it. But politically speaking, it is unbelievably difficult to take something away that people have, even if that thing is horrible. It's impossible. It's impossible to do. Barack Obama knew it then. Karen Bass knows it now. The people who are going to get into this housing before they have met eligibility requirements, I guarantee you, will either one, not get kicked out once they realize the eligibility requirements are not met, or two, the paperwork never gets done as a whole. I can tell you for a fact, if I could bet money on this, I would bet everything I have that either the people will just be allowed to stay in perpetuity, indefinitely, forever, even if they don't meet the eligibility requirements, or none of the paperwork that's supposed to get done will ever actually get done, because that's not the point. What's going to happen here with Karen Bass and her nonprofit voting bloc that commandeers the homeless industrial complex, what is going to happen is those rooms are going to get completely filled up with people who are probably not eligible, probably don't follow by any of the rules, and won't ever get the paperwork done to be able to live in those places. All of those places are going to get filled up, and then Karen Bass, I feel like I'm predicting the future, but it's not. I'm reading a story. In 3 or 4 weeks, Karen Bass will be out saying, we need more housing. All of our units are full. We just need more housing. And she's going to petition the Los Angeles people. She's going to petition the state of California. She's going to petition the federal government for more money to, quote unquote, build more housing at a cost that is astronomical and unsustainable for the taxpayer. And then we're going to get stuck with the bill for building more and more housing and flooding people in who don't deserve it, can work, and aren't eligible for it, because she'll be able to funnel money to a bunch of her cronies that are going to inevitably end up voting for her. Karen Bass is on the trajectory to also run for president at some point. I would say 2028, she probably runs for president, unless Gavin Newsom wins in 2024, in which she can't, in which case she can't. Oh, she'll probably run for governor of the state. Actually, that's probably her trajectory. She's probably going to run for governor in 2026. Anyways, that's what's happening there. California should be under a microscope constantly because the terrible policy seems to be infiltrating itself into so many different places around the country. But bottom line, at the end of the day, none of this stuff works. Housing first doesn't work. Don't buy into the lie that it does. Speaking of other things that doesn't work, I don't know if I like that transition.
So many people said
the sirens on the island of Maui. Wow, this is a complete full transition into something else. A lot has been made about the Maui fire, the sirens in the Maui fire not going off. Why wasn't the emergency system deployed? Why weren't the sirens set off? What happened? Now, to not bury the lead, the guy who would have been in charge and made the decision to, first things first, I thought they just didn't work. That, I think, was the thing that I think a lot of people thought. Just to catch you up here, a lot of people thought that the sirens didn't work. Also, we are finding out evidence seems to be pointing towards the Hawaiian Electric Company. A down power line caused the fire, which we can get into that maybe in a little bit. But going to be interesting to see how that plays out, especially considering the second largest, deadliest fire that happened in California in 2018, the Camp Fire, also caused by an electrical company, and that company did not face any repercussions whatsoever. So we'll talk about that in a second. A lot of people thought the sirens didn't go off. Turns out the decision was actively made by a government bureaucrat to not sound the sirens. Now, I'm going to let him make his case here because he does, but know that he has resigned, and I think he should have. The fact that they didn't sound those sirens and alarms is crazy to me. But I'm curious to see if anybody thinks his case is compelling. Watch this.
Do you regret not sounding the sirens?
I do not. And the reason why,
So many people said they could have been saved if they had time to escape. Had a siren gone off, they would have known that there was a crisis emerging. And as we know, so many bodies were found in the ground as the flames caught their heels.
Give me the answer.
The sirens, as I mentioned earlier, is used primarily for tsunamis, and that's the reason why many of them are found, almost all of them are found on the coastline. The public is trained to seek higher ground in the event that the siren is sounded. Had we sounded the siren that night, we're afraid that people would have gone Malka. And if that was the case, then they would have gone into the fire. By the way, I should also note that there are no sirens Malka, or on the mountainside, where the fire was spreading down. So even if we sounded the siren, it would not have saved those people on the mountainside, Malka.
According to the state's own government website, those sirens can be used for a variety of natural and human-caused events, including wildfires.
So he's making the case that if he sounded the sirens, people would think it's a tsunami and they would run for the hills where the fire was coming from, coming down to the ocean. I'm not buying that. Like this report said, that the state's own website said that it could be used for multitude of natural disasters. Had they sounded the sirens, you got to have faith in the people. You got to at least do everything you can to warn them, and then have faith in the people that they won't start going to the hills and then looking and going, oh shoot, that's a big old fire. Maybe that's what the alarm is. Word would have gotten around. People have varying degrees of communication. I know the power was out, but also you got to trust people to be able to save themselves. You got to do everything you can to warn them. I'm not buying that reasoning. But he has since resigned, which is, I guess good, but also like I wish I was surprised that a government bureaucrat made a massive mistake. To kind of piggyback on, we won't get into that. The fallout from the Hawaiian Electric Company is going to be really interesting. So Moody's, which is a investment ratings agency, downgraded the Hawaiian Electric Company to basically a junk stock. In other words, or bond. You shouldn't buy, says Moody's. I read that, and I read that whole analysis of like, here's what we think they're going to be liable for this fire, and this and that and this and that. But given what happened in California just a couple of years ago with the Camp Fire, with Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, being blamed for the fire and facing almost zero repercussions, it's going to be really interesting to see if that junk status stays on the Hawaiian Electric Company. If I were to be an incredibly cynical individual, I would think that because utilities companies in blue states specifically are so beholden to government regulation, they lobby really, really hard at the state legislature's office. PG&E does it in California and around the other states that they do business in. And Hawaiian Electric guaranteed does it in Hawaii. PG&E lobbied so hard after the Camp Fire that they ended up ultimately facing zero actual penalty. Yeah, they had to have an insurance payoff, but the insurance covered that. Yes, they had to pay varying degrees of money to people who were affected by it. But in terms of actually the state punishing the company, that never happened. The Public Utilities Commission in California slapped a $200 million fine on them, which in their mind is not a lot. And then 5 weeks later said, yeah, but you're not going to have to pay it. Any of the fines that were actually paid by PG&E to the state went right back to the company to fix their power lines, as opposed to just do it on their own with the profits that they have. All of that is to say, I would be very curious if Hawaiian Electric actually is a junk company to buy now, considering I guarantee you they're lobbying the same way in Hawaii as PG&E was doing in California. And if that is happening, I wonder if they will actually face any penalty that the insurance won't pay out that they already have for the state and for their business. The super, super cynical person that I don't like in terms of how I would think about this would say they're probably going to be fine if you're an investor. I don't know. That's just what I think. Let's see. A lot of people in the comment section saying no, that is a bad argument. From the guy saying people would have run to the hills where the fire's coming from. Yep. That'll do it for us today. Appreciate you sticking around, tuning in. I know it was like kind of California centric, but also I feel like zeroing in on California is super important, considering, again, Gavin Newsom has a decent shot at being the president, which I don't like, but that's just reality. If you haven't already, give me a follow on any of your social media platforms. Just type in JOBOB. You'll be able to pretty much find me anywhere. Tickets also for the Star Spangled Banter Fall Tour are on sale. You can find any of those on just follow me on social media. You'll be able to find all of that. Tickets are selling fast, actually, which is crazy to me, but cool. We're still like 6 weeks out from our first stop in Fallbrook, California. But again, like I said, tickets are selling way faster than event tickets usually sell. So I don't know if that says something about the country. But it surely doesn't say anything about me being funny. Yeah, so head over to those. We're going to Fallbrook, California, Van Buren, Arkansas, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Twin Falls, Idaho, and possibly Miami, but we're not sure on that yet. Or somewhere in the Florida area. So if you live in Florida and you have any suggestions of where we're going to be, I have an off day in the middle of the Turning Point tour, and I'd like to go do a comedy show on like a Wednesday somewhere in Florida. Anyways, so if you live in Florida, let me know where that should be. Appreciate you sticking around, tuning in. We will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend. Turn off the news if you can, but also, if you can't, good luck. We'll see you Monday, same time, same place. God bless America.